Vietnam, a land of contrasts, where the past and the present intertwine like the roots of a banyan tree. For thousands of years, this region has been the cradle of civilizations, a battleground of empires, and a symbol of resistance. Yet, how many truly know the depth of its history? How many understand the trials and triumphs that have shaped the spirit of the Vietnamese people? Join us as we embark on an epic journey, unraveling 20,000 years of history. From the ancient settlers who first walked these lands to the resilient nation that stands tall today. What stories do these mountains, rivers, and cities whisper to those who listen closely? Let's find out. Chapter 1. Prehistoric Foundations. Our journey begins long before the birth of written history, in a time when the land we now call Vietnam was a wild and untamed frontier. Approximately 20,000 years ago, the first modern humans, the Hoabinians, settled in this region. These early pioneers, named after the Hoa Ben province where their artifacts were first discovered, were masterful hunters and gatherers. They thrived in the dense forests and along the rivers, their lives intricately connected to the rhythms of nature. But even earlier than the Hoabinians, archaeological findings have unearthed evidence of human-like hominins in Vietnam dating back nearly 500,000 years. These ancient beings, ancestors of the Sinanthropus, roamed the Middle Pleistocene landscapes, leaving behind traces that tell us Vietnam has always been a land of human habitation, rich in life and culture. As millennia passed, the Hoabinians were succeeded by other cultures, each contributing to the complex mosaic of Vietnam's early history. The region's favorable climate, with its high rainfall, fertile soils, and abundant natural resources, made it an ideal location for the development of early agriculture. The seeds of civilization were sown as communities began to form, practicing wet rice farming and mastering the art of pottery and stone tool production. Chapter 2. The Rise of Early Cultures. As we move forward in time, we arrive at one of the most significant eras in Vietnam's ancient history, the rise of the Dong Son culture around 700 BC. This culture, named after the village of Dong Son where its relics were first found, is renowned for its advanced bronze working skills. The Dong Son people produced some of the most intricate bronze artifacts in the ancient world, including the famous Dong Son drums. These drums were not merely musical instruments. They were symbols of power, used in religious rituals and as markers of social status. The sophistication of Dong Son metallurgy is astonishing. The lost wax casting technique they mastered allowed them to create detailed and ornate designs, depicting scenes of daily life, warfare, and mythology. These artifacts reveal a society deeply connected to its environment and to each other. A society where the community was bound by shared beliefs and mutual cooperation. But the Dong Son were not the only culture to leave their mark on Vietnam. To the south, in what is now central Vietnam, the Sa Huyn culture flourished. Unlike the Dong Son, the Sa Huyn people were Austronesians, part of the broader family of seafaring peoples who spread across the islands of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The Sa Huyn were skilled in ironworking, and their burial jars, some adorned with precious beads made from jade and glass, speak of a culture with far-reaching trade networks and spiritual depth. These early cultures, although distinct, laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Vietnamese identity. They were the first chapters in a long and complex history of resilience, adaptation, and cultural synthesis. Chapter 3. Legendary Kingdoms. Every great nation has its legends, and Vietnam is no exception. The tales of the Hong Bong dynasty are as much a part of Vietnam's cultural heritage as its historical facts. According to legend, the first Vietnamese state was founded in 2879 BC by Kinh Dung Vong, a descendant of the dragon lord Lac Long Quan and the mountain fairy U Co. This mythical union between the dragon and the fairy is said to have given birth to the Vietnamese people, a race destined to endure and to thrive. Kinh Dung Vong's son, Lac Long Quan, continued his father's legacy, ruling over the kingdom of Van Lang, the precursor to modern Vietnam. The Hung Kings, as his descendants were known, are credited with establishing the first administrative structures, military systems, and cultural practices that would define the early Vietnamese state. Although much of this period is shrouded in myth, it is clear that the foundations of Vietnamese civilization were being laid. One of the most enduring legends from this era is that of Ton Jong, a young boy who, in a moment of crisis, grew into a giant and led the people of Van Lang to victory against invaders. Riding an iron horse and wielding an iron sword, Ton Jong symbolizes the resilience and bravery that would come to define the Vietnamese spirit. His story, passed down through generations, serves as a reminder of the enduring power of national unity and the strength that comes from standing together against a common foe. As the Hongbong dynasty evolved, so too did the early state of Van Lang. The kingdom, centered around the Red River Delta, was characterized by its complex social structures and its advanced agricultural techniques. The people of Van Lang were skilled rice farmers, using the fertile lands to sustain a growing population. They also developed sophisticated irrigation systems, which not only supported their agriculture but also demonstrated their ability to adapt to and control their environment. Chapter 4. Chinese Domination. But the peace and prosperity of Van Lang would not last forever. In 111 BC, the Han Dynasty of China, driven by a desire to expand its empire, invaded and annexed Vietnam, ushering in over 1,000 years of Chinese domination. This period is often referred to as the 1,000 Years of Northern Domination, and it was a time of great suffering but also of fierce resistance. The Han Dynasty's conquest marked the beginning of a long and complex relationship between Vietnam and China, a relationship characterized by both cultural exchange and bitter conflict. The Chinese sought to impose their language, their customs, and their political structures on the Vietnamese people. Yet, despite these efforts, the Vietnamese retained a strong sense of their own identity, resisting assimilation and fighting back against their oppressors whenever the opportunity arose. One of the most famous acts of resistance came in 40 AD when the Trung sisters, Trung Trac and Trung Ni, led a rebellion against the Han governor who had killed Trung Trac's husband. The sisters, born into a noble family, rallied an army of local lords and villagers and succeeded in driving the Chinese out of Vietnam, establishing their own short-lived independent state. Though their rebellion was eventually crushed, and the sisters martyred, their legacy endures as symbols of Vietnam's enduring fight for independence. The period of Chinese domination was also a time of significant cultural exchange. The Vietnamese adopted aspects of Chinese culture, including Confucianism, Buddhism, and the Chinese script, which became the basis for the Vietnamese written language. However, this cultural exchange was not one-sided. The Vietnamese also influenced their Chinese rulers, introducing them to local customs and traditions that would leave a lasting mark on the region's cultural landscape. Despite the hardships of this era, it was also a time of important developments. The Red River Delta, already the heartland of Vietnamese civilization, became even more significant as a center of agriculture and trade. The region's fertile land supported a growing population, and its strategic location made it a hub for commerce between China and the rest of Southeast Asia. Chapter 5. The Rise of Independent Dynasties. The struggle for independence reached a critical turning point in 938 AD, when General No Nguyen achieved a monumental victory at the Battle of Bac Dang River. By using ingenious tactics, luring the Chinese fleet into a river studded with hidden wooden stakes, No Nguyen destroyed the enemy and ended centuries of Chinese control. This victory is celebrated as one of the greatest military feats in Vietnamese history and marks the beginning of a new era of independence. Following this victory, No Nguyen declared himself King of Vietnam, establishing the No Dynasty. This was the first of many Vietnamese dynasties that would rule over an increasingly unified and powerful nation. The next millennium saw the rise and fall of several dynasties, each contributing to the development of a distinct Vietnamese identity. The Lai dynasty, which came to power in the early 11th century, was particularly influential. Under the rule of Lai Tsong Yuan, the capital was moved from Hoa Lu to Dai La, modern-day Hanoi, which was renamed Tang Long, meaning ascending dragon. This move symbolized the dynasty's vision of a strong, centralized state that could resist foreign invasions and foster economic and cultural growth. The Lai kings were patrons of Buddhism, and under their rule, Vietnam saw the construction of many temples, pagodas, and educational institutions. The Lai dynasty also laid the groundwork for Vietnam's legal and administrative systems, which would be further developed by subsequent dynasties. The Tran dynasty, which followed the Lai, is perhaps best known for its military prowess. During the 13th century, Vietnam faced the threat of invasion by the Mongol Empire, one of the most powerful military forces the world had ever seen. Under the leadership of commanders like Tran Hung Dao, the Vietnamese successfully repelled 3 Mongol invasions, utilizing guerrilla tactics and taking advantage of the natural terrain. The victory over the Mongols is a testament to the resilience and strategic genius of the Vietnamese people. However, the Tran dynasty was not just about warfare. It was also a period of cultural flourishing, with advancements in literature, art, and education. The Tran kings continued to support Buddhism, but they also promoted Confucianism as a state philosophy, creating a unique blend of religious and philosophical traditions that would shape Vietnamese culture for centuries to come. The 15th century saw the rise of the Liu dynasty, under the leadership of Le Loi, who is celebrated as one of Vietnam's greatest heroes. Le Loi led a successful revolt against the Ming dynasty, which had briefly reasserted Chinese control over Vietnam. His victory not only restored Vietnam's independence but also marked the beginning of the country's southward expansion, a process known as Nam Tien. This expansion would eventually bring the entirety of what is now modern Vietnam under centralized control. Chapter 6. The French Colonial Era. The 19th century brought a new challenge to Vietnam: the arrival of European colonial powers, most notably France. The French, driven by the ambitions of empire and the allure of Vietnam's resources, began their conquest in 1858 with the bombardment of Da Nang. Over the next few decades, they would steadily expand their control, eventually reducing Vietnam to a French colony. The French colonial period was marked by significant changes in Vietnamese society, economy, and culture. The French introduced new systems of administration, education, and infrastructure, which, while modernizing certain aspects of Vietnamese life, were primarily designed to benefit the colonial rulers. The exploitation of Vietnam's natural resources, particularly its rice and rubber, fueled the growth of the French economy while leaving the Vietnamese people impoverished and disenfranchised. Resistance to French rule was widespread, with various movements emerging across the country. The Can Vong movement, led by royalists who sought to restore the Vietnamese monarchy, was one of the earliest and most significant uprisings. However, it was ultimately unsuccessful, as the French military was far superior in terms of weaponry and tactics. As the 20th century approached, new forms of resistance began to take shape. Influenced by global movements for independence and inspired by the success of the Meiji Restoration in Japan, Vietnamese nationalists started to seek new ways to challenge colonial rule. Figures like Phan Boi Chau and Phan Chau Trinh emerged as leaders of a modern nationalist movement, advocating for education, modernization, and eventual independence. Phan Boi Chau's Dong Du movement, which sought to send young Vietnamese to Japan to learn the skills needed to modernize the country, was one such effort. Although it was ultimately suppressed by both the French and the Japanese, it laid the groundwork for future revolutionary activities. Phan Chau Trinh, on the other hand, believed in achieving independence through peaceful means and collaboration with the French, a strategy that also faced significant challenges. The French response to these movements was one of repression. Dissidents were arrested, and uprisings were brutally crushed. However, these actions only served to deepen the resentment against the colonial regime and to strengthen the resolve of the Vietnamese people to fight for their independence. Chapter 7. The Road to Independence. World War II was a turning point in the history of Vietnam. The Japanese occupation during the war weakened French control, creating an opportunity for Vietnamese nationalists to assert their claims to independence. In 1941, Ho Chi Minh returned to Vietnam after years of exile and founded the Viet Minh, a coalition of nationalists with the aim of driving out the Japanese and the French. The Viet Minh's efforts gained momentum, especially as the war came to an end. In August 1945, as Japan surrendered to the Allies, the Viet Minh launched the August Revolution, seizing control of Hanoi and other key cities. On September 2, 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared the independence of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in a speech that echoed the language of the American Declaration of Independence. However, Vietnam's struggle for independence was far from over. The French, unwilling to relinquish their colony, returned to Vietnam, leading to the First Indochina War. This conflict, which lasted from 1946 to 1954, was marked by brutal fighting and widespread suffering. The Viet Minh, under the leadership of General Vong Nguyen Giap, adopted guerrilla tactics, fighting a war of attrition against the better-equipped French forces. The decisive moment of the war came in 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The French, hoping to lure the Viet Minh into a conventional battle, fortified a base in the remote Dien Bien Phu Valley. However, the Viet Minh managed to surround the French forces, bombarding them from the surrounding hills. After 57 days of relentless fighting, the French were forced to surrender, marking the end of their colonial rule in Vietnam. The Geneva Accords, signed shortly after the battle, temporarily divided Vietnam along the 17th parallel, with the Communist North led by Ho Chi Minh and the anti-Communist South under the leadership of Ngo Dinh Diem. This division set the stage for the next chapter in Vietnam's history. The Vietnam War, a conflict that would have far-reaching consequences not only for Vietnam but for the entire world. Chapter 8. The Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, known in Vietnam as the American War, was one of the most devastating conflicts of the 20th century. It began as a civil war between the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and the anti-Communist South, backed by the United States. However, it quickly escalated into a major Cold War conflict, drawing in forces from around the world. The war was characterized by brutal and often unconventional warfare. The dense jungles of Vietnam became the battleground for guerrilla tactics, with the Viet Cong, communist insurgents in the south, launching surprise attacks on both military and civilian targets. The United States, in turn, deployed massive firepower, including the widespread use of chemical agents like napalm and Agent Orange, which had devastating effects on the environment and the population. The Tet Offensive of 1968 marked a turning point in the war. Although it was a military failure for the North, it shattered the illusion that the U.S. was winning the war, leading to growing anti-war sentiment in the United States and eventually to the withdrawal of American forces. Despite the peace talks and the signing of the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, fighting continued, culminating in the fall of Saigon on April 30, 1975. This marked the end of the war and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. The Vietnam War left deep scars on the nation. An estimated 3 million Vietnamese, both soldiers and civilians, lost their lives, and millions more were injured or displaced. The war also had a profound impact on the global perception of Vietnam, with images of the conflict seared into the consciousness of the world. However, the end of the war also marked the beginning of a new chapter for Vietnam, a chapter of rebuilding, reconciliation, and renewal. Chapter 9. Modernization. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, the country faced the monumental task of rebuilding. The war had left Vietnam's infrastructure in ruins, its economy in tatters, and its people deeply divided. The communist government, now in control of a reunified Vietnam, embarked on a series of ambitious but initially unsuccessful economic policies, including the collectivization of agriculture and the nationalization of industry. By the late 1970s, it was clear that these policies were not yielding the desired results. Vietnam's economy was stagnant, and the country was facing severe food shortages and economic isolation. Recognizing the need for change, the Vietnamese government introduced the Doi Moi renovation reforms in 1986. These reforms marked a shift from a centrally planned economy to a more market-oriented one, allowing for private enterprise, foreign investment, and greater economic liberalization. The impact of Doi Moi was profound. Within a few years, Vietnam's economy began to grow rapidly, lifting millions out of poverty and transforming the country into one of Southeast Asia's most dynamic economies. The agricultural sector, once plagued by inefficiency, became a major export industry, with Vietnam becoming one of the world's leading producers of rice and coffee. The reforms also sparked a cultural renaissance, as Vietnam opened up to the world and began to reconnect with its diaspora. Vietnam now is a country that bears evidence to the people's tenacity and will. From the bustling streets of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City to the tranquil rice paddies of the countryside, Vietnam is a country that has embraced change while honoring its rich cultural heritage. The challenges of the past have forged a strong and united nation, one that continues to look forward with hope and ambition. As Vietnam continues to grow and modernize, it remains deeply connected to its history. The struggles and sacrifices of the past are remembered and honored, not just as part of the national narrative, but as the foundation upon which the future is built. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Vietnam's history. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, let's continue to explore the stories that shape our world and deepen our understanding of the past. If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into the fascinating history of Vietnam, grab a copy of our detailed book version, link in the description. Packed with rich insights and captivating stories, it's a must-read for history enthusiasts.